All right, hello everyone. For the second time today, going live. Wow, what an amazing, what an amazing turnaround. Um, Good evening, guys and girls, or whatever time of the day you happen to be watching. Theseus Body and Mind Legion. So it is going to be a discussion, hopefully this evening. We've had a bit of problem teeing up with my co-host, my brother Gareth, today. We're hopefully going to get him involved in this one today. Got a pretty awesome discussion that I've been wanting to talk about for ages, which is standards. All right, so continuing the fitter body, stronger mind series. Okay, looking at all the various ways that we can help facilitate peak performance across all areas of health. Okay, across all areas of lifestyle. All right, today we're really talking about standards, drawing on experiences, my experiences of the Royal Marines, okay, elite UK infantry, and hopefully drawing on some of Gareth's experiences if he's able to join us today. Coming from London Shootfighters gym, training there during his professional fighting career. It's one of the most highly revered mixed martial arts gyms in the world. One of the key players in consulting guys like the UFC when they got going and all of that stuff. So hopefully he'll be able to jump in and talk a little bit about that. I did do a short video a bit earlier on today, which kind of summarised what I wanted to talk about, but the key points in there for everyone that was tuning in at the original time that we had scheduled. So it's worth watching that as well. We're going to cover again a few points like that. Really, I want to cover the main ways in which you guys at home or whoever's listening can start re-evaluating various standards across your lifestyle in order to make huge improvements in whatever it is you're looking to make improvements in without actually making that much change. This is the great thing about standards, is that you can make huge swathes of positive change just by reassessing and resetting a couple of key standards. So that's the main thing that I kind of want to talk about today. And mostly as well, the importance of standards, why it makes so much difference. And it's funny, I finished the talk earlier on sort of point number 4, I guess, of my sort of 4-step action plan for reassessing standards with a note about sort of breeding consistency through sustainability. So ensuring that the standards you set for yourself are realistic, at least in the short to mid-term, so that they can become, so that those changes in behavior can become consistent over time and they're sustainable over time. As a really good example that came to me after I said that of how setting the standards too high sometimes can go against you, and it's not on a personal level, it's not on an organizational level, and it is with the Royal Marines. Like many people still believe that the slogan of the Royal Marines, here we go, Gareth's going to jump in. Perfect.
Hello.
All right. Hey, Gaz, how you doing?
What's the slogan of the Royal Marines?
Well, the slogan of the Royal Marines currently is "It's a state of mind," and it used to be for a long time. One of the strap lines was 99.9% need not apply. And a lot of people still think that that is the current slogan, but it's not. And the reason that they canned it was because there was a huge dive in recruitment because so many people convinced themselves off the back of that slogan that they would never get in. They had no chance of getting in. And the reality is it's more like 75% need not apply. And so, it was like they whittled their options down to 0.01% when actually there's like probably 25% of lads that,
That's funny.
Take that first step.
In that kind of recruitment, it's always, you're always throwing stuff at the wall anyway, and a few of them are going to stick. I mean, that's always going to be the nature of it. But yeah, if you've got less fodder to throw at the wall, I can see that being an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. That was just, I don't know how much you heard at the start, but that was my example of when standards set too high, aren't sustainable over time. So it kind of goes both ways. I actually did a quick video earlier But just gave an overview of my sort of action plan for reevaluating standards and why I think they're important and stuff like that. And my parting kind of note on that video was to make sure that wherever you change your standards, to breed consistency through sustainability, to make sure that you're realistic about what you're changing. So good. So I'm really glad that you were able to jump on, Gaz, because I really want to talk about some stuff relevant to your experience, relevant to your history, especially to do with your martial arts career, because you managed to get to a pretty really high level with submission wrestling and a really good level with professional MMA as well. And no doubt that's largely down to the environment that you came from, which is London Shootfighters. So, I was mostly talking about the Marines and things in the video that I had earlier. Basically every time you ever get beasted or punished as a recruit in the Marines is pretty much down to adhering to standards. And the reason that they don't want those standards to drop is because essentially, whether you're an individual or you're an organization, the outcomes, your accomplishments are a direct result of your standards, aren't they? That's basically how it works.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. So why don't you sort of give us a little bit of a spiel about sort of London Shootfighters and where you think the differences in standards within that organization make the difference for the fighters that come out of there?
I think number one is it was one of the first MMA gyms because of Paul and Alexis's wrestling background that treated the fighters as athletes primarily. It's common now, but back in the day, martial arts was normally, guys in pajamas, having fun. There was a lot of, sparring and this and that, but there wasn't that sportingness to it. There wasn't that professionalism. So if anybody knows anything about mixed martial arts, there were various evolutions of it. So, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was very influential and was one of the founding reasons the Ultimate Fighting Championships, the first big mixed martial arts organization, was founded. It was the brainchild of a member of the Gracie family, and they had a legacy of training Jiu-Jitsu in their family, which came from an ancestor in Brazil who helped a Japanese diplomat establish a Japanese colony in Brazil, and by way of thanks, he taught the Brazilian diplomats' sons, by the name of Gracie, what was then judo, and judo was a recent kind of sporting variation on a whole cluster of Japanese martial arts that are lumped together and simply called jiu-jitsu. And at the time, sometimes that sporting format was also known as Kano Jiu-Jitsu, after the founder of judo, Jigoro Kano, and judo became a more sort of recent term. So for them, it was jiu-jitsu. They went to that sort of the root martial arts name and called it jiu-jitsu. And they had, as generations went on, to cut a long story short, they basically stamped their own flavor to it, and it became Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There was something distinct about it. So anyway, they believed it was an incredibly effective way of fighting and pretty much undefeatable. And so they had what was known as the Gracie Challenge. You could have anybody from other style come along, and essentially one of the members, Rorion Gracie, had the opportunity to commercialize it and create this UFC, this Ultimate Fighting Championship, where all these different styles could come together and fight. And initially, now everybody sort of cross-trains, but it was like karate versus wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. So why am I talking about this? So in martial arts, and even in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, even to this day, it tends to be more of it gets trained in that way that martial arts were trained, and there's not so much an emphasis on being an athlete and athleticism. It's totally changed at the highest level of sporting competition, even within that sport. But what happened in mixed martial arts these grapplers, these jiu-jitsu players that were strangling everybody and locking joints were winning. And then suddenly there was this sort of revolution where all the wrestlers started smashing everybody up. And the reason they could do that was not only was it very easy for them to start to, because they were grapplers, to start to understand the methodology behind jiu-jitsu, the joint locks and the chokes and the strangles, because it was very similar to everything they're doing in wrestling anyway. All the positions of control. Wrestling is about incapacitating somebody and pinning them on the ground and throwing them, obviously, getting them there in the first place. And jiu-jitsu is about, manipulating somebody's joints or strangling them until they either submit, or if it's a real fight, true combat, you actually you break the joint and you strangle them unconscious. So it was a really easy crossover. And then these guys with wrestling background, as they started learning jiu-jitsu, it'll burn a lot of jiu-jitsu players to hear this, but they became better than the jiu-jitsu players in many ways, even at their own game, in that mixed martial arts format when it came to a real fight. And the main reason is, and it sucks, but being extremely well conditioned as an athlete and good technically as a martial artist will always be extremely technically good and good as an athlete. So it doesn't take a lot to actually nullify someone's technical ability. You only need a little bit of technical ability at a decent level to stop yourself from being submitted very quickly, and to take that, in this case, that jiu-jitsu player to a point where they would fatigue and their technical level comes down. So there, some great quotes from some old wrestlers like Martin Farmer Burns going back a century and a half ago. And that was, conditioning is your best finishing hold. These were catchers, catch-can submission wrestlers. What is it? Fatigue makes cowards of us all. And these kind of things. This was intrinsic to the wrestler's ethos globally around the world. So whether you're from Georgia, Japan, England, the USA, these are things that were in wrestling culture. Wrestling culture, the wrestlers, perhaps in the UK and a lot of countries that aren't wrestling nations, no one realizes what incredible athletes wrestlers are. Just as a side note on sort of what I'm saying about, I know we're talking about fitness standards, so it does come in. So I grew up, I did boxing, Thai boxing, all these other things. And in many ways, I was actually more talented as an amateur boxer. I was more talented as a kickboxer. I enjoyed going to wrestling and being around wrestlers so much because they were the best athletes. They were the fastest people. They were the strongest. They were the most agile, because there was that culture of being an athlete as much as being a technically brilliant whiz at what you're doing. So how did that come into London Shoot? Well, both Paul and Alexi were on the Great Britain, the Olympic wrestling squad. So it was one of the first teams that had this culture of being of saying, okay, you're not just a martial artist in the way that we kind of think about it. These guys that, on a Saturday and a Friday night, put pajamas on and do chop socky in the local village hall or sports center. Like, you're an athlete. You run, you lift weights. You have, fitness tests. There's a 2 mile, time test on your runs. There's a this, there's a that. There's standard. At your body weight, you should be able to put, your body weight over your head with a barbell. All these kind of things, these standards that we had, and that is, the blacksmith's forge, that forged us, that bang, 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 sort of hammered us all out. And yeah, in that sense, that's what made London Shootfighters, and still continues to make London Shootfighters, probably, in my opinion, the premier team in the UK, because it always had those standards. So where do those standards come from? Is the next question, and how do you get them? On the technical side, that's a really hard one to answer. In terms of technical competence, it's very, very subjective. But on the physical side, on the sort of the athletic side, these are measurable, these are quantitative and in some ways qualitative as well. You know, how fast do you run your 2 miler? Can you put, you know, your body weight over your head? You know, so on and so forth. You know, there are various different metrics. You know, can you do a sub 20 minute 5K? You know, these kinds of things. And one thing I definitely noticed from being there is the most consistent winners from that team were the guys that were consistently the best runners on that 2 mile time test. So, for example, you could have people that were more talented that would win big or pull off, you know, really cool, amazing moves in fights, but then you'd have certain guys who perhaps not as technically brilliant, but just kept winning. You know, they just kept winning, kept going on that tear, on that winning streak, because they you know, they were good enough to not get finished. And they, you know, when you're in an MMA fight, or any fight for that matter, you're getting physically beat up and you're getting fatigued. And sometimes being physically beat up doesn't even feel as bad as being fatigued and fighting through your fatigue. You know, it's brutal. You're blowing out of every orifice, and you wish you could breathe through every orifice. And you can't lift your arms and your legs, and there's somebody that's trying to punch, kick, and throw you on the ground.
Yeah.
And it's like when you go past a certain point of your comfort zone regarding your fitness, now you're going down to hell and you're being dragged over coals, and it's a matter of time as if you can find that big umph to just lift you out of it, or you're just slowly going to wither away and lose on decision, or eventually get caught or get knocked out. And that's what these people were doing to people, and it's like taking people's souls, and that is the difference between consistent winners and guys that have that that big pop and then they come down again. They have that big pop and then they come down again. Like you can keep winning just by being great and being you, because you're talented to a certain level. But what's the expression? Talent doesn't work if talent doesn't work. So if you haven't put that time in, then eventually you're gonna come short when you're equally technically matched.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and it's something that you can visibly see in fights as well, isn't it? When you're watching MMA or boxing, you see a guy that came out in round one looking like he was ready to dominate the entire world or take on an army, and then in round four you can see that look on his face, like doesn't really want to come out. He's just not got the energy there anymore.
Definitely.
And everything just drains away from there. So what I'm really getting from that then, really with regards specifically to London Shoot, is that the difference in standards that they've set that have made them stand out so much from the rest of the crowd is treating athletes like actual athletes, and by some way of means putting into practice standards of fitness that are above the typical gym. So are there any kind of examples? You mentioned a couple of things like 2-minute runs and stuff, and I know you've talked to me before
2
about
milers,
that Alexi used to put you through.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed best efforts on the Versa climber that are on the brink of putting guys directly into the underworld. But were there any kind of stringent sort of like set standards that you can think of as examples that would just like be interesting kind of anecdotes?
The 2 miler was really it, to be honest with you. That was the be all and end all. There were definite circuits and things like that. I know nowadays it's the Versa climber. They got that kit in after I left. But the 2 miler was the standard, and essentially you could not be even put forward to go into camp to train for a fight unless you were having a sub 12-minute 2 miler. That was the basis. That was your base platform from which coaches are going to work with you from.
Yeah,
So yeah, that was the be all and end all. And then, like I said, with technical ability, that's a qualitative thing. I mean, there are certain. That's when it becomes individual to the individual athletes. There's certain things that individuals do well. So one of the ways of looking at it is when you weren't getting ready to compete, there was almost like a sort of free time. And that's actually one thing I wish I'd developed more, is you had free time to sort of develop your own style and develop your techniques and really play with things. And then once you know you've got X date and you will be competing then, within 8 weeks of that is when your true training for that event starts. And in many ways, you stop learning new things at that stage, and you just sharpen everything you already have, and you drill it down and really, really, really make it yours. So it's, the way I look at it is there's almost like a period where you're allowed to be a bit chaotic, and then after that chaotic period, it's ordered. But even within that chaotic period, there are fitness standards. There is that sub 12-minute 2-miler. There is that put your body weight over your head. There is there's certain routines to develop plyometric strength and things like that, and power endurance that would involve doing sort of medium heavy weights for 12 reps, immediately followed by 6 or 10 explosive bodyweight versions of that exercise. So if I had 70 kilos and I did 12 back squats, then immediately upon finishing that set, doing 10 tuck jumps, landing silently, high as I can, bam, 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 landing silently, bench press, clap press ups, and so on and so forth. And then the standards there, a bit harder to measure, but they're qualitative. You don't want to be thumping boof down on the ground. You want to be absorbing it and flinging yourself back up. And it was interesting. It was interesting to see what types of athletes people were, or just naturally what their genetic athletic gifts were. I have a good friend, and we would do the bench and clap press ups together. And with the weight that he was doing the bench, sometimes I'd fail on that, but I could always complete my clap press ups. But his absolute strength, he could, get the weight up quite easily, but not always with good quality complete the clap press ups. And part of that is about rate of force generation. So it lets you know what you can actually use in the fight. So those standards kind of come in and tell you what your qualitative work is. So what's the relevance of that? Well, the sports scientist in me is coming out now. So if I were to throw a punch or even throw a javelin or a shot put or anything like that, anything ballistic, basically, as a general rule, any force that takes me longer than a third of a second to generate is wasted for my event. So if I can bench press that and eventually get it up, my absolute strength might be there. But in terms of bam, throwing a punch, anything that takes me longer than a third of a second to generate is probably not going to translate into that punch. It's too late. The action's happened. The action's too fast. And so, to use that as an example, the reason, I could hit harder and sharper or jump higher and hit like a flying knee with more power or something like that than my friend who was stronger than me on the weights, is because even though I had less absolute strength, I was able to generate the absolute force that I'm capable of faster. And so it lets you profile the athlete and know what they need to work on. So, that guy needs to do more plyometrics. I need to do more, strength work, because if I get my strength work up and apply my speed to it, I'm going to be able to hit even harder. And then, you've got to obviously keep that at your weight. So, yes, these things are very useful yardsticks for profiling the individual and knowing where you are. And these are still things that I use, tools that I use in my life now, just for my sort of personal health and fitness goals. They help me understand where I'm at, even in terms of, say I just wanted to become a better runner, long distance runner. There are times when you have to ask yourself, where and why are you aching? Is it my systemic overall conditioning, or is it something local? Am I hindered by not wanting to push that amount of force through a particular joint? And these things help you. And with that sporting background, you know if it's a strength issue, an explosivity issue, or just an overall general systemic conditioning, aerobic capacity issue. And these are the...
Yeah.
Sorry,
that's really interesting what you're saying there, because I want to talk about that as well. It's like carrying over standards that you've learned. I mean, I want to talk a little bit towards the end about how people can actionable steps that people can actually take towards sort of reevaluating their own standards and stuff. But I think this is really useful for, setting in stone how valuable it is to have those certain standards in key areas, and how once you identify with them, they become part of you. You won't be always searching it becomes less effort to achieve more and perform at a higher standard once your standards just are higher. They just do become your standards. And that's one thing that I took away from the Marines. It's like, it's actually really easy in some ways to completely stand out from the crowd. When you take the average, guy who's just come out of the Corps, and maybe they're still young, they've had a fairly short career, anything between sort of like their minimum term and maybe sort of 10 years, they've still got a whole career ahead of them. And I've heard numerous stories and accounts from friends and things of guys that have left the Marines and gone into like a corporate type job and just flown up through the ranks. And if you think about the kind of core standards that get set, even when you're in training for the Marines, it's things like always be on time. In fact, being on time is actually being late. Being on time is being 5 minutes early. If you're not, everyone who's on time is going to be doing push-ups while they're waiting for you to get there, And then there's things like just being presentable, always being clean. You have your nails and your ears and your face and everything checked before you're allowed to go into the galley or the eating area to eat. And if it's not good enough, you get sent back. And when you want to leave camp, even when you're in your civilian clothes, they check that you've got a collared shirt on, that you're wearing a belt, that you're clean shaven. They don't let you go ashore, as we call it, but back into civilian street, without upholding those standards of the Marines. And then what happens as a result of that? I mean, obviously, once you finish training and you start your career, you don't carry on living as regimentally as that, but those standards become ingrained in you. And even when you leave the Marines, what are you now? You're a person who's generally more timely, much more timely than the average person, much more punctual, who's much better presented, who always looks smart when it's appropriate, and who's absolutely diligent with every task. I mean, most of the stuff that gets drummed into you, especially in the early part of training, is bullshit administration stuff. And I say bullshit because it seems like bullshit, because you turn up there to be a soldier and you're hand washing all your clothes every night for like that's like 10 weeks or something like that. And the main emphasis is on just having everything ironed and stuff, and you're like, what's going on here? Like the fact is, like, even if you go to, you have to be absolutely diligent with everything. Everything has to be perfect. If the standards aren't set, you're doing it again, you're doing it under worse conditions, and you'll get thrashing at the end of it, some sort of physical punishment. Even if you go to a shooting range and spend the whole day shooting there, your hierarchy, your seniors will expect you to leave that shooting range cleaner and better kept than when you found it. Even if there was expended cases everywhere when you turned up there better not be a single one when you leave. And that's what gets ingrained into you. And so they take that out of the Corps and you put that into civilian street. You're never late, you're always well dressed, and you complete every task to the absolute best of your ability. And even if you take something on that was half done by someone else, you finish it to a better standard than it was given to you as. It's no wonder that with those kind of core standards underneath you, you're able to outshine just about everyone else around you, you know. And that's kind of the thing that I'm really trying to encourage when I talk about standards with anyone, but, you know, clients as well. You know, I'm sort of going off the Pareto principle quite a lot, and I mentioned this in the video earlier as well, is this kind of rule of 80% of the results are actually can be generated by about 20% of the changes, you know, if you focus on the key changes. And that's the same with standards. You know, if you want to get in better shape, if you want to improve your career, if you want to improve your social skills, your personal relationships, you know, any of that stuff, you don't have to reset every standard that you have for every occasion. You only have to look at the key standards that are in place and say, right, you know what, I'm not even going to worry about anything else to do with fitness. The fact is I'm only getting to the gym once a week. My standard now is I'm doing minimum 3 workouts a week. That might be enough to turn your physique around completely without even really going into the nuances of how you're training and how your diet is and all of that other jazz. And you know, diet's another example. You know, people do this all the time. They take on diets like keto or, you know, paleo or whatever, because it's a simple thing. It's like, just cut out these, you know, just cut out this one food group, or okay, just don't eat this. And then you hear people saying all the time, oh, all I did was cut out bread and I've lost 78 stone in a week.
You know? But it is true.
So that's kind of thing. But one thing I did also want to come on to, and this was a very waffly way of coming to this point, but was that those standards do translate into other areas of life. And you started touching on it there, where you're talking about, you know, you still use those fitness metrics that you harnessed in London Shoot in your day-to-day today. And that's the same for me. I think back to what I used to do when I was in the Corps, like, you know, even like, well, a BFT is, you know, basic fitness test is like however much distance in whatever time. I used to do that in boots, you know, and you're always translating it. So do you feel like, aside from fitness, how do you feel those standards that were set for you within somewhere like London Shootfighters, where you spent so much time, have translated into the other areas of your life, like family, you know, career, stuff like that?
Family, career in many ways, definitely. And I think being in that environment where the pursuit is excellence in a qualitative way and in that quantitative way, in terms of your actual martial arts ability and things like that, is, and what I mean is technical ability, is it has, what I feel, given me a skill that has allowed me that even if I know very little about another subject, I feel I can weed out who really knows what they're doing and who really is very good at it very, very quickly. So I know when someone's just farting around and they've done it for 5 minutes and they're acting big, or even maybe they think they're great, but they don't have the experience. And when I see somebody who's really experienced and really good at what they do, and I feel there's an instinct there that I can tell when somebody has pursued excellence in their field. That is definitely a skill that's come over. And I'll give you an example. When I was training for wildlife and trails guiding, I spoke to a lot of people. I went to a few different places, and there was one course I ended up doing. It's actually with a company called Eco Training, and the chief instructor there, Bruce Lawson, I could just tell was brilliant. He was just excellent at what he did, and it wasn't because I, as well, again, those instincts kicked in. I mean, it wasn't because, you know, I didn't really know that much about it, even though I was, you know, fairly well experienced experience-wise, in terms of being a wildlife warden and hanging around with indigenous peoples and stuff like that. But in terms of that industry, I was very green in terms of the education side of it. And I could just tell at that school compared to the other places, he was brilliant, and his protégés were brilliant, and the people were just excellent. There was a level of true fascination and pursuit of being good at what they do that echoed, and it just resonated that there was a level of confidence that wasn't false. There was a level of assurity that wasn't naivety. There was in what they did and where they were going. And I think if it wasn't for having, dare I say, achieved excellence in martial arts, I wouldn't have been able to. I don't think I'd have been able as well equipped to spot that in other people in other fields. And so that is definitely something that's carried over. But being a person that has been that has had to adhere to very high standards, I can see that trait in other people, and that allows me to select not necessarily just friends, but the company I keep for tactical reasons in life. I like selecting which is going to be the best trails guiding school. That's a good example. And then as in terms of habits, when you're interested in something, I mean, even now, I'm a person that's always actively seeking to be brilliant at things that I'm interested in. I tend to not take things on for want of a better expression, shits and giggles, because it's not part of my personality type. I'm one of those guys. If we were to go out and play frisbee in the field, some people just want to run around, chase the frisbee, laugh and giggle, oh, fell over, and try and throw it and giggle their heads off when it, flaps in the wind or whatever. And I'm the guy that's trying to throw it as efficiently and as well as possible, make it fly as fast and as far, or can I intercept it and flick it around on my wrist and send it back to you with accuracy? That is, what I'm the guy that if we met up to play frisbee once a week, I'd be practicing frisbee in the garden or, at home against the wall. I'd be doing. I'd be picking up hammers and working on my wrist strength or something.
That's funny. People like me and you are not actually that fun to play with.
No. Yeah. And I wouldn't even care about being competitive in those moments, because this is training. This is where you're supposed to fail. When we have a competition, we'll be competitive.
That's it. I mean, I'm the same. From the second that I put my hand to anything, the only thing I can think about is how I can do it. How can I improve it? Just start obsessing over it. And it's like, if someone's organised a friendly table tennis match with me, on once a week, is really drink a beer. And I'm like, right, how can I work on my coordination? What can I do to work on my reflexes this week?
Oh, man, I'm even worse. If they wanted to play table tennis competitively, let's have a game and let's see who wins. No, let's not have a game. Let's drill, and then in a couple of weeks we'll have a game. Let's practice. Let's train so this game is worth playing. Because otherwise we're just farting around.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's really good examples, to be honest, that you gave there as well, because it ties in with another kind of element really that I wanted to touch on as well, which is sort of using this method of reevaluating certain standards, just general health, specifically fitness, specifically things like personal relationships and social skills. And what you're talking about there is how raising standards in one area can translate to improvements in areas as well. So I'm not even thinking about, I was thinking specifically about but specifically about improving your standards of communication, which would directly have an impact on your ability to be personable with people and to build relationships with people and build rapport and stuff like that. that, you know, and that's a lot of stuff that I personally studied to be a better coach, you know. But you're talking about how just having experience in certain fields also boosts your sort of social skills in that respect as well, you know, having an idea of certain things. So yeah, that was really interesting that you mentioned that. So earlier on in my video, where I kind of gave an overview of the action steps that I had planned for this one, I basically laid it out. I just kind of simplify, and I'll see how much of it you agree with, and sort of your take. I think would be interesting to get another perspective. So my sort of four steps to taking action on this is to firstly evaluate the key standards, as opposed to wasting time thinking about all the different standards across all different metrics that, you know, you're measuring yourself by. You know, looking at the areas that you want to improve, if it's fitness, if it's business, you know, if it's just your own personal well-being, like mood, you know, or well-being, or whatever you want to call it. You know, highlighting those areas and sort of reverse engineering it from there. You know, evaluate the key standards that might be letting you down. And, you know, and like we talked about earlier, just resetting a few key standards could be enough to make those massive changes without having to go into the nuances of everything that you're doing. The second step would be to cultivate the environment, and this is again one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about London Shootfighters, and the reason that we had Simon Jeffries on to talk to us from, you know, his experiences about special boat service and like his holistic approach to health and well-being, talking about cultivating that winning environment, surrounding yourself with people whose standards either match or even exceed your own, relevant to those goals that you have. Yeah, that's a big one. And it's not to say that you need to necessarily cut people out of your life whose standards don't match yours with specific goals, but just thinking about who to associate with in certain areas of your life, and who you could potentially bring on board to add that accountability. So it's basically evaluate your key standards, cultivate the environment that supports them, then build the habits around those standards that support those standards. I think sometimes people get a bit confused with habits and standards. Like a habit's not a standard. Your standard is the standard, what you need to do in order to achieve a certain goal. And the habit is the specific behavior that obviously facilitates that. So then once you've got those standards, building your habits around them. And then the final is the one that I brought up pretty much at the start, which is the consistency, you know, final things to make that consistent, which is basically the final part of every plan, because if it isn't consistent, then it doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, just on that last note, so that's really resonated with me. I think consistency overall, and it depends on how long your timeline is for what we're calling consistency, but let's just call it indefinitely and potentially for life. Your methodology has to be something you enjoy. It can't be for a reward, a pot of gold at the end of the day. And it's a great cliche, you know, it's not the, you know, the destination, it's the journey, you know, in life and everything like that. But it is so true. It is so true. And, you know, I've got this big spiel that I've got a particular bugbear about, you know, and you and I have talked about this. You know, people always talk about, like, what's your why? How strong's your why? And I feel like, you know, who gives a crap about going into the details of your why? Deep down inside, in the bottom of your psychology, you know, you probably know you just like it for whatever reason. You can get a psychiatrist to tell you what your why is in over the next 20 years, because you don't live in why. Why ticks you off, but what you live in is how. How are you doing it? And if the methodology of how is bloody miserable, that stacks you up in terms of your probability factors towards failure. Because who wants to get up every day for misery? You can get up every day for hard work. You can get up every day for sweat and grind and even to bleed a bit. But there has to be some joy in it, at least some, or if not just straight up joy, like a sense of achievement in the moment. Something's got to tickle your dopamine to to carry on. So it has to be fulfilling in some manner what it is that you're doing. And I think that in terms of cultivating an environment, well, select an environment that's at least fun and enjoyable for you. Otherwise, it's probably going to fail, and you're not going to feel good about that failure, and you're not going to feel good about the journey either. None of it's going to feel good. But imagine, I mean, it's hard for me to think of an analogy, but let's say you went into a business and it was just so much fun, and you put 5 years of your life into it, and it was amazing. I don't know, you dived in the ocean, rode horses and motorbikes all day, whatever it is that you think is fun, and after 4 years of that business, 5 years of that business, it flopped and failed. But you had an amazing 5 years. You had an amazing 5-year run. So even if you failed, you had a great life. Whereas, yes, it would have been capped off by success. But imagine it being the other way around. Like, you're just slowly grinding and you're putting your work in, you're having to motivate yourself to get up today and do miserable things. And it fails anyway. Because the best laid plans of mice and men can be like that. There are things beyond our control. This entire universe is, a universe at play. And you had a crappy life. So I get, in short-term things, short-term pain for long-term gain. And that will always, 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 always happen. But overall, I mean, in those macro cycles, you've got to be enjoying it, or consistency is just not gonna be there. So on that final point, I'd say be very diligent in your methodology of how you get to your goal, because that's really where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with everything you said there before. And this is my eternal frustration. Why are people focusing on the driver? It's because they think that the thing that's holding them back is that they don't have enough motivation. So they're in this eternal search for enough motivation to always do the things that they know that they should be doing. And that's the flawed mentality. That's exactly where you're going wrong. Fuck motivation. Screw motivation. You're never going to have enough of it in spades that you're just going to turn up every single day for training or every single day for work and have your best day. It's never going to happen. But what can happen is systems that become so robust habits over time that you just identify with those things. There's so many things I do now that I never don't necessarily enjoy that much, or I never used to enjoy at all. I just do because I've just conditioned myself to do them. And it's things like cold showers. That's probably the number one. I don't really enjoy the cold shower. I enjoy the feeling that I get afterwards, and that's the point. Is there's two sides to this story. There's enjoying the process, and there definitely needs to be enough of something about the process that you enjoy that you will keep doing it. But it only has to be enough. It doesn't have to be the most undescribably thing you've ever done. It just has to be something about it that you like. And then the other thing that you're going to enjoy is that end result. So forget about the why. I know exactly what you mean. I get why people say it. Know your why, understand what your driver is. Understand what your driver is. But once you've highlighted it, that's fine. Focus on what you want, because the system that you put in place is going to get you that. And then you're happy anyway. So just do that. Add enough. The bulk of what you set out to do should give you some fulfillment from the journey alone. From the process alone, it should give you some fulfillment, so that you're not just beasting yourself to achieve certain accomplishments and then hinging your happiness on the accomplishment. Because if you're always hinging your happiness on outcome, then you're never truly happy, right? But it doesn't have to be super fun. Nothing. Your system just has to be your system long to just become what you do. And then when it becomes what, you never have to worry about motivation. You never have to think about what your why is again, because you've just got a robust system of habits, also known as a lifestyle, that lends itself to the success that you want. That's it. Who cares what your why is? You know why. You already know why you want it. To be honest, you don't need to think about it for more than 2 seconds, and then done. Now
Yeah.
just focus on what it is you want and what you need to do to get there, and then do it. Easier said than done.
Exactly. Yeah. That is where sort of building a plan comes in, and it's such a broad way of talking about it. It's hard to really sort of go further without giving case specifics on things, and everyone's an individual, so it's very specific to you.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's why we do coaching, because if everyone could just watch this video and then run away with it, that would be the easy part, and everyone would be doing that. But then, they're not. This what we're talking about here is just is a taste, really, of what can be useful for people to understand. It's kind of like the core principles. You don't necessarily need to focus that much attention on your why. If you spend more focus on putting in place a system that delivers the outcomes you want, and figuring out how to make that manageable, you're going to get what you want. That's going to make you happy. If you can add some enjoyment factor, some fulfillment factor into the process, then that's going to get you done. The nuances of how to do that in the most effective way possible are what you would get, when you're on a one-to-one coaching call, and that's why we do that as well.
Yeah. Well, bringing it back to fitness, if someone's had no experience, they don't know how to evaluate themselves. And if we were talking about fitness within this conversation, what we're really talking about is programming, understanding yourself and programming. That's what standards are. What are the standards are, so I can make a program. And I think for every beginner needs a program. They need a program. And then that way they can understand what it all is and what it all means. And then as you start to understand and know your body and know yourself, okay, then we can start putting some standards in place for you based on your profile. It's very easy to profile yourself if you've, in fitness, if you frankly had as much experience as I have, or you have, so I guess what I'm saying there is, if you apply that lesson from fitness, you need coaching, is find a mentor that you trust, and through that mentor they can then sort of teach you to fish as you develop experience and get to know yourself in whatever facet of life it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will know where you're weak and where you're strong if you're really honest with yourself. And it's like what you were saying when you were quoting what's he called, the Savage.
Goggins.
Yeah, exactly. So what did he say? He said your mind's got the ultimate tactical advantage in that it knows all your weaknesses, and it'll play on them. And even like your rational mind will start to rationalize with them. The only way to deal with it is to confront them head on, and in a cognitive way, and think about it. And perhaps that's where writing things down and stuff like that can come into it. And now that I've learned to assess myself as an athlete and profile myself as an athlete like that, I feel it's quite easy to break down other things in my life where I could be better. So say, for example, I want to be a very knowledgeable guide when I'm guiding safaris. I can say, right, there's a value to, I'm a trails guide, I'm on foot. Number one, what is the experience I'm trying to deliver? I'm trying to, my message, like, this is actual sort of reality. This is me personally. I am trying to help people understand human-wildlife interaction by interpreting animal behavior. And it's particularly exciting to do that, well, with everything, but particularly with dangerous game. And then what happens is the world around that broadens. So I need to think about profiling myself and my knowledge to be the best guide I can be. So there was a time, you finish all your courses and I can tell you how, many inches a giraffe's tongue is, and what an elephant's liver weighs and how many liters of blood they can pump through their ears, every, 6 minutes, and, this kind of thing. But in the moment, for the experience those people have, it's not really relevant. It all sounds very clever. So, okay, so that technical knowledge, even now, some of those little facts I've sort of forgotten because I've looked more into other things. So I profile myself. So what's one of my weaknesses? Well, what's one of the biggest things that let me know where big game is? It's birds. Okay, so I need to get better at one, identifying which birds have which relationship with which animals and what they sound like and what they look like. And even if I don't know, I can't see them in detail and they're flying, I need to know what their sort of flight patterns are. So for their general impression, shape and size, I can say we are potentially very close to dangerous game here. And it's probably likely to be eland or buffalo, because now I see cattle egrets or something like that, which come along and peck things left by the hoof prints and doo-doos that are bugs that are churned up by them moving through the ground or something like that. The big one is obviously oxpeckers and things like that. But those are some of the getting lost in the details of my career now that has come from being an athlete. So by being an athlete, I know how to profile myself, saying, I've got great muscular endurance, but I just tend to wither overall. My systemic cardio endurance is not up to standard. I need to do X training because that improves that training. I need to improve over here in my, career, and one, to help people have a better experience, and to be a safer guide, and to just be more knowledgeable and just be better at what I do in general, because that psychosocially it makes me feel good and gives me confidence. And everyone's got that kind of ego-driven imposter insecurity. It makes me feel good about myself psychosocially. So now I'm working on my profile as a guide. So I don't know sort of where we kicked off into this from what you said, but it's about sort of translating standards from one thing to another.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. Like, you do develop the skill set of self-assessment, and especially I forget sometimes.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I remember how I started it. Yeah, so it's about beginners basically need mentoring and need training before you can get to that level. But if you've done it in one thing already, I feel like you can get another place faster. Once you've learned how to be excellent, let's just call it that, how to be excellent, and how to teach yourself, you can transfer some of those skills to almost anything else.
Yeah, I think I got that point from what you were saying anyway. I think I mean, maybe I'm a bit more in tune with it anyway, but before you even consolidated that, that's where what I thought you were sort of getting to, and I was about to agree with you, and I was going to say, as an example, I forget sometimes as a coach, I have to remind myself to walk through certain processes with people. Sometimes I'll say to people, I think we can agree that a really keystone habit for you is going to be to include some kind of mindfulness throughout the day, especially when I'm dealing with sort of really, career-driven professionals who don't really take many breaks through the day, and they're telling me that they want to improve their focus or their productivity or whatever. Then we'll identify sort of keystone habits that are conducive to those goals, and then I remember I've got to explain to them now what that means. Because if someone was to say that to me, then I would instinctively go away and be like, right, I'm going to put together a system for that. Let me, I'll think about that, and then and a lot of people aren't really used to doing that, like you say, and I've done lots of sessions where I've talked people through like visualizations and guided people through, reframing their mindset and stuff, because I've realized you can't just give that to someone, tell them that's what they need to do and let them run with it. You have to really kind of talk through this process. But like you say, once you get used to that idea of self-assessment and analyzing what you feel you need to do, and then putting together a programming system that's going to get you there, you can translate that skill set into anything.
Yeah,
and that's really the point of coaching. Really, it's tools in the toolbox.
I think if people are learning something as well, what can really help them learn, and you can make it very specific, is teaching and teaching it. So, and that's humbly at the level that you can teach at, because when you teach something, you really think about it to describe it to somebody else, and you start to realize aspects of whatever it is that you've learned that you may have glossed over beforehand. And
Definitely.
you know, I would do that in martial arts all the time. I'd re-show a technique to somebody else, and there might have been something the coach had said that didn't really resonate at the time. And then as you're teaching it, you see it from a new angle. You're like, oh, that's why they said to constantly squeeze your thighs or keep your knee up or, you know, hold the wrist, you know, this way, not that way. You know, like, that makes, now I'm watching someone else do it and trying to get them to do it. It makes complete sense to me. So I think, yeah, if you have an opportunity to relay something you've learned to somebody else, you know, being careful not to do it wrong because you're so fresh to you. But you know, to do that, I think really helps. You when you teach, you sort of learn twice. You know, you learn again for yourself as much as it is for the other person.
Yeah, and you question what you actually know as well. Because sometimes you make a lot of assumptions about what you think you know, and you sort of carry that knowledge with you. And then when you have to actually impart it to somebody, you check yourself.
You fill in the gaps.
Do I actually know that that's true? Is that true? And it was,
exactly.
You know, same to be said for yeah. Same to be said for this this talk. Like when I had the idea of discussing standards, I think about sort of what the lessons were that I'd learned from with regard to that, and I watched a couple of other sort of talks on it, like keynote speakers giving talks on relevant subjects and things, and it made me really question, you know, what I think I really know about it, and it highlighted some kind of areas in my own like life and work ethic and things where I thought, yeah, actually, I kind of need to practice some of this stuff a bit more. Yeah, so there's so much benefit. I think you're absolutely right. Teaching something to someone is 100% the best way to explore it and to consolidate like your own learning of it.
Yeah, definitely, buddy. I'm gonna have to cut it.
Yeah, I think we're good, man. We've been on for an hour and we've covered, you know, basically everything. I covered some of this stuff earlier as well, so that's awesome for me. I mean, is there anything you would say just to kind of part with? You know, we've gone through some action steps. Is there anything that you'd want to add? Like, where would be the best place for someone to start with just kind of taking what we've talked about today and putting it into action for some lifestyle improvement?
Think about the level that you're at. If you're a total beginner, find a mentor. If you're midway through, assess your profile, like where can you improve. If you're an absolute expert, master, Tathagata, Buddha, attain nirvana at it, then you can start exploring your why. But until then, you know, just keep working on your house.
Yeah, in general, just forget about your why. Tell motivation to go screw itself and forget about your why and start putting in
and just enjoy it. Just enjoy it. Just find things that are obviously conducive towards your goal, but are done in the most enjoyable fashion possible, where you're simply looking forward to it.
Be fulfilled, strive for more.
And understand what your standards are. You know, understand, are your standards challenging, and are they the absolute minimum standard by which to attain what it is you're after? You know, when you're setting those standards, are they the absolute minimum that you would attain? And if you think they're the absolute minimum, then up those standards a couple of notches up, and those are your personal standards, because they should be over the minimum.
Definitely.
Cool.
Great way to round it off, mate. Thanks very much. Mate. I'll let you go. Cheers, guys.
Until next time.
If you're listening, if you're watching, and you're ready to take the leap, okay, to peak performance, okay, we've got an exclusive coaching program. It's available to a limited number of people. You can get yourself on the waiting list for that program if you're interested. It's really easy. If you are keen to have a chat, you can just book in a call with me. We'll sit down on the phone, have a nice chinwag about your performance goals, whether it's fitness, business, personal life, whatever it might be. We'll talk about your roadmap to get there, whether we're the right fit for each other, and then we can talk about how we can make that work best for everybody. If you enjoyed the show today, okay, by all means, check out the other stuff that's on YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel if you want to. All right, if there's any questions about anything that you've seen today as well, feel free to either drop it in the comments or send me a direct message, either via the website, via YouTube, whatever means is easiest for you. I'm more than happy to answer questions. If you've got ideas for future content, future shows, we've got some pretty awesome ones lined up already, but let me know and I can try and steer some content around answering your questions and your queries as well. Most importantly, have an awesome day. Keep striving to accomplish more. Dare to be different. Dare to be better than average. And I'll catch you guys all again soon.